Hello, welcome again to FAIRtax Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Steve Hayes.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys.
FAIRtax
I still
Guys.
have my fat Albert here,
You
which
do.
is the graphical representation of the income tax, both the complexity thereof and the everyday. I'm not going to mess this up too bad. It'll take me forever to put it back.
Yeah.
But that's the tax code if it was a Rubik's Cube. And there we go. Now I got it.
We aim to change that and make it just one square.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I've got a little 2x2. That's what I use to represent the fair tax. But anyway, as they used to say in the broadcast media, we interrupt our regular programming, to bring you this special announcement here. And that is, we were in the middle of the rest of the story series here on FAIRtax Power Radio, telling people things about the fair tax that the media is not going to. But we're actually going to put that episode off a week and then finish that up next week, as we have Steve Hayes, the president of Americans for Fair Taxation, with us. And we've got a lot to dig into here, Steve. And I want to pick your brain on a number of things. Of course, at the top of the list is what the election of Donald Trump, him having a second term, is going to mean for the fair tax. He's already on record as saying he wants to get rid of the income tax and replace it with tariffs. Can we steer him off of that idea and onto the fair tax, do you think?
I think we can, but I think it's going to have to be done deftly. It's like, let's just say a friend of mine who has some familiarity with the new president, said, Steve, it needs to be his idea.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And so we can't just come in and say, well, tariffs, that's stupid, and expect to get anything except a raised up back and I'm going forward. But what I think we can do is we can say, yes, tariffs are a way to go. There's no question about it, because it does tax consumption. The problem with tariffs, if you look at it, is that you normally are going to get into a trade war, and maybe that's okay for a lot of our products. But the other problem is it's very indiscriminate in that it raises prices on everything for everybody in terms of not only the imports, because let's say you're importing an item that costs $10 and you put a 20% tariff on it. He's talking 10%, but it's probably going to take more. Let's say it's 20%. The 20% tariff on that $10 means it goes up $2. Well, if the U.S. product was selling at 11, are they going to keep it at 11? Or are they going to go to 11.50? Okay.
Yeah, not if they can still raise their prices and still maintain a competitive advantage.
Right. And I think that's one of the problems with the tariff, and it's a lot of the people in this country, even though they'll get their entire paycheck, are really not going to get the benefit of the family allowance, the prebate that the fair tax offers. In other words, you're going to need to look at how do we make that tariff increase fair to Americans, really, to the majority of Americans. And remember, under $100,000, people overwhelmingly voted for Trump. Mm-hmm. Over $100,000 in income, it went to Harris. Well, the people who are going to be most affected by the increases from prices from tariffs are the people under 100,000. So
he'll be messing up his own constituency.
But we can't tell him he's messing it up. But he has to find a way to provide a benefit. Now, honestly, you could take tariffs and you could provide the family allowance or prebate, just like we're doing with the fair tax. And that would do a lot to make it more fair to lower income people. So let's not discount that. But if you want to look at doing something that I think over time is much more stable, is look at the difference between a tariff, which 4 years from now, if another president comes in and wants to put the income tax back, he just gets rid of the tariffs. Mm-hmm. And now you're in a mess. You're back
All
to
right.
where you're in a real mess.
We're not getting rid of the Internal Revenue Service with tariffs.
No, not
Not-
necessarily. We're going to have a much smaller one. And he wants to repeal the 16th Amendment, which is good, but I don't think it's going to happen in the next 2 years. Maybe. I mean, I can hope. That'd be ideal. But the fair tax, though, because it's a rate that's hard to manipulate, once it's in place, it's collected by the states. So there's no reason to have that administrative nightmare of the IRS. And it's very simple because it's only complied with by approximately 10% of the people that file tax returns today.
And there are tariffs on China, for example, now that Trump put in place that Biden kept. So
and he can still do it again, Bob. He can put in more. He can do like he did in his first term. He can tell France, look, if you don't want to play ball fairly with us, I forget what the issue was, but there was something they were really discriminated against. Might have been wine. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a tariff in of X%. And about a week or two later, France came back and dropped that restriction. So he does that from a negotiating ploy. He did it with the Japanese on something. I mean, he did it with a lot of different, I say his administration.
Yes.
And so he can still have that ability. It's just that the primary revenue creation for the government comes from the fair tax. It's much more difficult for a subsequent administration to change. Tariffs, executive can just change them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. However, the fair tax, once it's established and in there for 4 years, it's going to be very, very difficult to uproot, particularly if you've disbanded the IRS and repealed the 16th or in process of doing so. So
Indeed.
I think we have to approach it carefully, but I do think that because the president knew about and talked about the fair tax when he ran in 2016.
Yeah. Well, let me refer people back to the chair. Actually, the last couple of chairman's reports you published were on Trump's effect on the fair tax. But you made a really good point in the second one, saying that Trump has got 4 years in office, but we might not have that long to get the fair tax done. We have, in reality, we've got to look at this as if we've got 2 years to get this done. Can we get it done in that time frame? And why do we only have the 2 years? Explain that.
Well, I think the answer is it's going to take the president making it a priority. He's going to have to be willing to get up and push it because many people in Congress are very comfortable with the system as it is.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to have to go over their heads and to the people, like Reagan did, in order to force this through. And I think he can do that. I really believe that there are enough vulnerable senators that won by 0.5%, maybe the Democrats, and ones who are coming up for re-election who see the same writing on the wall, that if enough people start demanding a reform like this, it's going to be very difficult for them to oppose it. So I think we'll get through the filibuster, but we don't even have to do that. We can do it through reconciliation if we have to. But you've got a situation where 18 months from now, all of the House members are going to start thinking about re-election. A third of the Senate is going to start thinking about re-election. There's going to be a lot more attention on that than potentially doing any real work in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And they also know that this is a game where they don't have to win. They just have to delay, meaning the opponents of real reform. If they
don't have to convince people that the income tax is a better system. They just have to delay the fair tax until the next election, where it's possible that President Trump's party would no longer control both houses of Congress after the midterm.
Absolutely. And that's their dream. And that's something that'll happen. Of course, ironically, we believe, I think everybody here today and almost all supporters of the fair tax, that if Trump pushes this, his party is going to even get a bigger majority in both houses because it will be so much evident to people that he's doing a good job and that he's really helping the American people.
Yeah,
the
I thought
economy is going to boom immediately.
I thought all along that painting your opponent as a friend of the IRS is a really good way to defeat him, and I'm surprised nobody's really used that.
Yeah. Well, he's going to, he has the courage to stand up and take on anybody. And he will, in his own party, in the Democrat Party, he will point out that they don't have any clothes on when they try to come up with all these reasons that makes no sense to that, all of this junk, because economically, we have the weight on our side of economic data. There's no way the economy won't grow faster. There's no way that prices in the U.S. will not come down if we strip out all of the income payroll tax elements of the prices. So we've got the winning logic. We just have to ensure that that logic gets conveyed. And the three of us can't do it, but the president can, because he can go on the air anytime he wants. When he goes to a rally, he gets 50,000 people, right?
Yeah.
Well, I've spoken to 2,500 before, but that was my top. Okay. and I wasn't able to do it every day. But if he does it and goes out, and it's like I was talking to John Linder, I said, if he's got people, particularly Republicans, that are against his, let's say his agenda is to put in the consumption tax, the fair tax, he can say to them, look, you may have your reasons, and I'm not going to say, they're incorrect, but I think it's fundamentally sound to put in this new tax system, get rid of the income tax, get rid of the IRS. And if you don't agree with me, then I'm going to go into your district and I'm going to urge your supporters or all the voters to contact your office and say that they need to insist that you follow this plan. And I asked John Linder, I said, how do you think that'd be received? And he said, obviously they'd be upset, but it would be very effective because that is what they have to have. They have to have the votes to be reelected. And I don't care how safe your district is, you can be beaten.
And you can be
if enough of
primary.
your voters don't like you.
You can be primaried for sure.
That's right. Or general election. I mean, Dan Rostenkowski back in the 90s was at an institution, head of the Ways and Means Committee. He, turned out he was taking bribes like most Chicago politicians were at the time. But before that, he was an institution. I think the most anybody ever got against him was 30%, something like that, when they ran. He got beat by a Republican because his position on things upset so many people in his district. His position on Medicare and all. I mean, he just became across as someone who could care less, and they beat him. So these guys all know that no matter who you are, you can be defeated if you're not careful. And they know that the president, among that large part of the electorate, and people under 100,000 are a lot more than people over 100,000 in votes, that he can move the needle against them. And like you said, Bob, more likely a primary, but it could be a general.
I think part of the conversation with our elected officials now, because and this is for Democrats and Republicans, you can, as a Democrat, you can talk to your representative, but we're sitting here at the end of the year with the debt expected to be nearly $36 trillion.
Right.
The cost of servicing that debt back in July 2023 was annualized at $726 billion, about 14% of total federal spending at some point in time. And of course, we've got the fire lit from all the discussions during the campaign, about how do we take care of this debt? And one thing that we have talked about before on this program, Representative Linder had made a comment during one of our episodes with him that at some point in time, those representatives are going to basically say there's only one way out of this, and that's with the fair tax.
Yep. Well, and that's because of economic growth. Because, there is a gentleman who's is an interesting economist named Peter St. Onge, and he was on Glenn Beck advocating repealing the income tax. He did a video, which I'm sending around, which is a short one about abolishing the income tax. He's saying you can keep tariffs and do it with tariffs. That's fine. I've got an email to him. I'm hoping to talk to him. But he is a guy who's out there pounding the drum, abolish the income tax. And there are going to be more and more and more than just us. And we need to make common alliance with those people, whether we agree with their method or not. Look, if we got rid of the income tax and had an amendment actually going before the states to repeal it, you can always go to a fair tax when it becomes evident tariffs aren't working, because you only then have consumption taxes as an alternative.
Yeah,
you've got a value-added tax, a financial transaction tax, or the fair tax. That's what you have left. So would I say it was a big victory if Trump abolished the income tax, abolished the IRS, and funded it initially for tariffs? Yes. Because
absolutely.
If you repeal the 16th Amendment and do it right, if tariffs don't work, and I don't think they long-term will, you've only got a few places to go, and we're standing there with our hand up, being the best.
Absolutely. Touch on another thing, you just brought it up. Why is the VAT, the value-added tax, the wrong way to go versus the fair tax?
Well, you got to ask who your audience is. If you're in DC and the elites, it's the right way to go, because the value-added tax can be played with just like the income tax. The value-added tax is where you take a product, let's say it's a tree in the forest. You cut the product and you sell it to the lumber yard. Well, you've added value to that product because now it can be made into, lumber. And so you have a tax on that value. And let's say that tree was worth $1,000 and now it's worth $1,500. And you have a 30% value-added tax. So you add that on, so it's now sold to the lumber yard or the lumber mill at $1,650. Okay. And each step, like they plane the wood and they, carve it and they sell it on to somebody else. He adds value. He has to pay a tax. He gets credit for the tax paid, but he pays the addition. And the prices keep going. Now, what they can do with the value-added tax, though, they can say, Bob Paxton, you've got a radio station and you're adding value as you go along. And what we're going to do, though, if you are willing to have an agreement that you're going to follow these rules, like you're not going to use gender and you're not going to hire anyone except minorities and special people.
Yeah, you follow our social agenda and we'll play with you.
Yeah, we're going to charge you 15. That's all you're going to pay.
Yeah, now, but if I don't, then they're going to charge me 25. Is that?
They're going to charge you the full amount. You got a choice, Bob. And so that's what happens a lot with value-added tax. Plus, in some countries like Italy and in Mexico, the system is totally gamed. They have people that, have fake tax receipts. They get refunds from the government. It's just a total mess. And every single business in America has to file the tax return, including Bob's radio station.
Yeah.
Whereas with the fair tax, your return is very simple, Bob. You don't have to look at all these other taxes. It's like you're adding at retail, to the extent that you have a retail thing. A lot of your advertisers are businesses. You're not going to charge them fair tax. But if you did have to charge, it's a simple return. we've all done or been involved with having retail sales tax returns. It's how much did you sell? What's the tax on it? Okay.
Okay. Let me shift gears here real quick. We're about out of time we got about 8 minutes left. Give us Steve Hayes's 30-second elevator speech of how we FAIRtax supporters can be most effective in taking advantage of the fact that Trump wants to get rid of the income tax. How do we, nuts and bolts, how do we make this happen?
I think what we do is we contact our member of Congress and we ask for a meeting. Most of us aren't going to get it, but enough people asking for a meeting to discuss getting rid of the income tax, and that's the way I would phrase it.
Okay.
Elimination. The president wants to eliminate the income tax. What does Congresswoman, man, think of it? We'd like to meet and understand. And I think if enough people start flooding their offices with requests for where does the congressperson stand? Can we meet with the congressperson?
Mm-hmm.
Very quickly, they're going to see it's an issue that has legs in their district. And that will motivate them to be much more receptive when it's laid before them as a possible plan. In fact, may motivate them to actually push it themselves. Because that is a huge thing to these guys. They love the power of the income tax. They love the fact that it's an ATM machine for contributions. But most importantly to them is to be reelected. And we have the ability to threaten that. So that, I think, would be the most effective thing we can do. Secondly, send a communication to the White House telling how proud you are that President Trump wants to get rid of the income tax. And I would add the IRS, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And let him know that there's a lot of support out there to do it. And I think if we can have people doing those two things, we are going to see a huge amount of pressure coming on people who otherwise don't want to change it. Like John Thune is Mitch McConnell light. He isn't really looking at upsetting all of the Senate playthings, and the income tax is one of those playthings. They don't mind all the regulations. They really don't. They don't mind all the bureaucrats. But if people are demanding get rid of the income tax, they would sacrifice that in a second if it allowed them to keep some of their other pet projects in place.
Yep. Well, I see the wheels turning, Bob. What do you want to ask him?
We hear a lot about term limits this go round. We hear that a lot, but how would term limits affect getting people into office that would support the FAIRtax? And it's a kind of a two-part question. How do you, if you were able to get term limits, then you could find people and encourage them to run. It would be easier for them to get elected because of the machine would be dismantled because of term limits.
Well, it would be to a point, Bob, but first of all, you need a constitutional amendment. It's been ruled by the courts. California tried to do it, and that's what the Supreme Court ruled. Second thing is that unless you are able to, and I think we're getting there much more now through shows like yours, through all the big podcasts and all, we're giving people, alternative candidates, let's call them, an opportunity to put out their message and be heard and endorsed. But what you've got today, though, is a situation where there is a machine that's in place, the Republican machine, the Democrat machine. And we saw it with the Democrats when they had a coronation for Kamala. That's the way they really want to do business. They don't really care what the people think. Unfortunately, there are Republicans the same way. They'll pick a candidate, and that's who they're going to run, and they'll put as much money behind that candidate as possible, even if it's for a limited term. but I think we do that. But the one other thing I wanted to add, Bob, and I think it was in my article that came out today, is that we've got to recognize that real people work for the IRS, that real people work in these bureaucracies. A lot of them don't have anything to do with the deep state. They simply are doing the job that they think they have. And if we're going to eliminate them, let's be compassionate about it. Let's give them a runway. Let's give them an opportunity to get severance pay for 6 months or a year to find another job, because they've got kids to feed. They've got mortgages to pay.
Yeah. So the point is
they create this problem.
Yeah, the income tax system may be considered an evil, but the people that are fighting for it, and a lot of times they're just, fighting for their families. They're not.
That's right.
We're not fighting evil people. We're fighting people who are having to support an evil system just to subsist and stay alive.
Right, and a lot of them, because over my years I've met a lot of people that work in these committees in Congress and in the Treasury Department and also in the IRS. And almost all of them I liked personally. Mm-hmm. I've been to barbecues with a lot of them where they brought their kids and it was, they're not bad people per se, but they're in a situation that's not helpful to America. Let's help them transition to a new job, a new career, because many of them are pretty smart, very smart. In fact, a lot of them are.
Given the economic growth that the FAIRtax is going to like, there should be plenty of other jobs for folks to move into.
There will be. There'll be different jobs because they will not necessarily be as protected against being fired. They're not necessarily going to pay the same amount of premium over the regular economy. But truthfully, as you create more jobs, as you create more business growth, the demand for labor is going to go up. And it's always been a principle in this country that the more you demand labor, we saw it in the COVID time, all the people that would leave for higher pay, well, that's going to be magnified maybe 10 times, because if you have a scarcity of people who are engineers, for example, you're going to have to pay more to either keep them or get them. So wages are going to go way up, I think better than government work. And I think there'll actually be a lot more feeling of fulfillment with what they're doing.
Yep. Final thought here, Scarborough?
I guess working for the Internal Revenue Service, the popularity factor is kind of like being a dentist. Right now, it's a necessary evil with regard to, how people feel about their jobs. Dentists don't particularly like their job, but they seem to be good at getting in people's mouths. Internal Revenue Service seems to be good at getting in people's pockets. So we would encourage our viewers, listeners, supporters to call your congressman and your senator and begin the conversation with them about the FAIRtax as the solution that will take us away from the precipice of deficits and debt mounting every day.
All right. Well, Steve, as you noted in your chairman's report, this is kind of literally a once in a lifetime chance that President Trump's election, has given us. We may not get another chance like this in our lifetime. So FAIRtax supporters need to mobilize. We can always be respectful, always be polite when you're dealing with the folks that we have to deal with, but be firm in your resolve to accept nothing less than the FAIRtax, and hopefully we can get this done here in the first 2 years of the Trump administration, or at least take a step or two down that path that will eventually get us where we need to go.
Right. Yeah. Information is out there. People are seeing, as they say, the light, and I think he's opened up a window to possibility that can't really be closed. But in order to make it work, we've got to push.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time for this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. Steve, always a pleasure to have you on the program, especially to talk about good news like we have here. And we will hopefully have you back here before too much longer. But until we meet again, we got to wrap this up. I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
And I'm Steve Hayes.
And we are the FAIRtax Guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax, and once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid. Also, any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that, send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes or maybe we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, I mean, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but, well, it's all right here.
Can I get a copy of that?